welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and we have Austin Chadwick, my co-host. And today we are joined by Diana Larsen, somebody that I look up to very much and has deeply influenced my retrospective habits over the years. And so, I wanted to kind of just have you maybe introduce yourself, Diana, and talk a little bit about yourself, and then we can kind of get into some of our topics today.
Oh, okay. Well, some people might recognize my face, but a lot of people don't. I've noticed, and some people know my name, but don't know anything else. So I've been involved in the Agile community for super long time, since before it was called Agile. And have looked for ways to make my contributions. And one of those is the Agile Retrospectives book that I wrote with Esther Derby. And another is, my contributions are a lot around learning and a lot around continuous improvement and a lot around sort of how to help teams be healthy and productive. So I also wrote a book with Ainsley Neese called Liftoff, Start and Sustain Successful Agile Teams, which is about how do we help teams get started in a really good way. And have been very involved with the Agile Fluency project. I co-created the Agile Fluency model with James Shore. And with Willem Larsen, who you both know well, wrote a book called 5 Rules for Accelerated Learning. And I'm happy to report that one of my most favorite workshops around that happened with you and your folks down at your offices. So
yeah,
that was very cool. And now my current work is a lot with the Agile Fluency project that rolled out after we created the model. And what we do is coach and train and support and mentor Agile coaches so that they can have the most get the most benefit out of their practice and make their own paths more fruitful for them and for their clients. Yeah.
So I know that you've been working on the Agile Fluency model for some time. I think I remember being one of the early test subjects a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe the first topic or the first question that I want to run into is how does mob programming / ensemble programming fit into the Agile Fluency Zones? Maybe we can talk about even what the Agile Fluency Zones are.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because that is one of the tests. Mob ensemble programming is one of the tests that we have used to sort of validate the model. Because when we wrote the model, when we published it, the first article about it, Martin Fowler published on his website. And at that time, people didn't know a lot about mobbing, and it wasn't really kind of part of what people were talking about. And so we, in our delivering zone of the Agile Fluency model, the 4 zones, we mentioned pairing, but we didn't mention mobbing. But now when more and more people are talking about that, we realize, hey, there's this new practice that has come on the scene and it fits right into the model just seamlessly. I mean, it's clearly a delivering zone practice. It clearly is what, helps people do continuous deployment and continuous delivery to their customers and continuous integration. And that has been one of our good tests. As new practices come on, we look at, well, so what zone would this fit in? And it always feels good when things just are obviously just slot right in to where they belong. So
Yeah, if you don't mind me asking, what are the different zones, and
Okay.
what's the usefulness of them to
Yeah.
help
Okay.
maybe at least me set the context of being in zone 4? It sounds super cool to be in zone 4, but I'm not sure what it means yet.
No. Yeah. Well, not for everybody, for sure. The whole idea of the fluency zones is that there's lots of different ways of being successful with agile practices, and there's a lot of different agile methodologies, frameworks, whatever people are calling them now, have absolutely a role in the right place for the right reasons. And so what Jim Shore and I wanted to discover was, what are some of those flavors of Agile and how does that work, right? And so our goal is that, our vision is that every place that says it's using agile practices or using an agile approach, or advertises in its job descriptions, hey, we're agile, that they are doing agile in a way that is done well and that really benefits the business and the people who are doing the work. And so that's what we want to make sure happens. And so that's why we made this description. So the model starts with what we call pre-agile, and we don't actually spend a lot of time describing that, but it is that state of being where agile isn't really needed, or the awareness that agile is needed, agile practices are needed, hasn't happened yet. So individual contributors working separately, getting their tasks handed to them by a manager, doing a long period of work, and then trying to integrate everything at some future date, and maybe then throwing it over the wall to the testers, and that all going, as it often does, not so well. Or if it does go really well, then that's the place to stop in the model. If that sort of pre-agile way of working, some people call it phase development, some people call it waterfall, there's lots of different, some of it's just kind of ad hoc, how it grew up here kind of way of working. If that's fine, then you're done. You don't even need to dive into the rest of our model. And that's really the message of our model, is that you only need to develop the fluent proficiencies, the skills as a team that you need. And investment beyond that is, probably isn't really necessary. So, but after a period of time in pre-agile, a number of organizations, quite a lot of organizations, have decided that was inadequate for them. And so the first zone that we see people moving into, we call the focusing zone. And it comes from that name comes from a shift in thinking, a shift in focus from individual contributors to working as a team, and a shift from doing work according to components or engineering, interesting engineering problems or those kinds of things, to actually building based on what is going to bring value to the customer and to the business. And that kind of shift in thinking. And that's the first zone. So the focus on teamwork and the focus on creating value, that carries with it certain practices. A lot of it has to do with getting really good as a team and working together as a team and connecting with the business liaison. Many cases that might be a product owner or a product manager that helps the team know what's going to be valuable once it's created. And I've worked with a number of organizations that was the place to stop. Just that assurance that the teams were always going to be working on the next most valuable thing, and that they were going to be doing that in a way that was effective and efficient. That was good stuff, right? But not every organization can stop there. And so then we move on. We take all of those skills and we add some new skills in the delivering zone. And this is where the really high level, extreme programming style engineering skills start kicking in. So we start talking about pairing and mobbing. We start talking about continuous integration. We start talking about the cross-functional team taking in more functions, where before it may have been just the programmers and tests and maybe a couple of testers and possibly the product manager, depending on how close they're working with the team. Now we may have DevOps, we may have UX, we may have technical writers, we may, a number of other folks may join that cross-functional team in the delivering zone. And the idea here is to deliver very low defect work, maybe no bugs, 0 bugs, right? and so on. And then the next zone takes all of that, all of those proficiencies from focusing and delivering, and that we call the optimizing zone. And that is the zone where we get true cross-functional teams, where not only are there the technical builders involved, but there are also salespeople, marketing people, anybody that is needed to get the product out the door and to make the decisions to make that happen fast. Mm-hmm. And so no handoffs, fast decision making, and so on. And then the fourth zone, all those things roll up. And then in addition, in the fourth zone, which we call the strengthening zone, is where we find teams that are actually focused even beyond their product. They're focused on the health of the whole organization, and they are included in decisions about health of the whole organization. And so we kind of, we don't really describe it this way in our article, but a sort of quick guideline for me is focusing zone is really about effective stories, right? What are the stories that are really going to serve the customer? Where delivering tends to have more focus on whole features like MMFs, right? And then in the optimizing zone, we're focused on the whole product, making sure that that's heading in the direction and staying out there on the cutting edge. And then in strengthening, we're focused on our organization. How do we as a team contribute to that? So that's there's no quick and dirty for the Agile Fluency model, but that's the quickest and dirtiest I can accomplish.
Yeah. Well, and I feel
that's
like
very helpful.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I feel like so I've witnessed the transitions, right, of the company. Say I think I've been involved in 2 companies that said 2 or 3, probably more.
Yeah.
All said like, oh well, what we're doing right now is just fundamentally not working, right? Like that first transition happens a lot, and I've seen it.
Right.
Witnessed it in person many times.
Yeah.
And so I guess. What would you say in mobbing and pairing? I guess, you kind of mentioned a little bit of the technical practices and getting together and delivering.
Right.
Is there some hurdle that companies typically end up having to jump, or something along those lines, or maybe like a cognitive block or mental block that
I think there is. I think there really is. And when you need people to have those high level engineering skills and you need them to be across the team, whatever their contribution to the team is, whether it's DevOps or whatever, then there is always that barrier of it takes time to learn stuff. I mean, this is where the learning focus comes in. It takes time to learn new things. And a lot of organizations either aren't aware of that or don't really understand the value of giving time for that learning. The sort of Japanese saying about go slow to go fast. take the time to really figure out what it is you need to do, whether that's planning or learning or whatever, and then you really accelerate, right? And take the time to make sure that the knowledge is being spread through the team. I think that's why ensemble programming is so valuable, right? Is because it not only works to keep the bug count really low. I mean, you are one of the few places where I've really seen things being produced with, 0 bugs, right? And have that as a real goal and a standard, right?
Yeah.
And, knowing that that's possible. Well, you don't get there overnight. That there's a learning curve to get there. And every new mob that's brought together needs to learn to work together. I've been so impressed with the adjustments in how retrospectives are done when teams are mobbing, and how it's such a much more frequent activity, shorter but more frequent. And Woody's emphasis on continually turning up the good, I mean, that's a retrospective practice in my mind.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can do it after a couple of pomodoros in 15 minutes or 5 minutes, and then every day for a few minutes at the end of the day, and then on some longer cycle looking at the bigger overview, but constantly making those adjustments, that tends to happen in the delivering zone. And it requires leaders and managers who understand that those pause points are hugely valuable in terms of getting them what they need and getting them the outcomes that they need. I have run into very many leaders and managers and organizations who've said, well, I don't understand. They were all standing at the whiteboard all day. Why weren't their hands on the keyboards? And why don't I have 16 hands on the keyboard so that things are coming out really fast? And it's like, it's not how this kind of work works,
Yeah.
right? That's not what is effective when you're building software. When you're doing creative work together, it really looks different. And I think that's one of the big cognitive differences. You can't assume that, well, I used to use the digging ditches metaphor, but I've come to realize that if people really organize themselves as a team to get ditches dug, that looks different than we often assume as well, right? And but maybe it's more like, one time I was asked if I would do some team building work with a group of cable television installers. And of course, each one has his or their own truck, their own tools, their own assignments, their own everything. And so I said, well, I can talk to people about how they can make their own work more, but trying to create a team across a bunch of cable installers doesn't make any sense. Trying to create a team between the installers and the dispatcher, now that begins to make some sense, because they need to be working together.
Yeah.
So it's really thinking through what is the nature of the work and what does the team need to look like, and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I had some follow-up questions on the fluency zones.
Sure.
And so maybe it's, I don't know if it's just lack of knowledge, or it's just a fascinating thing for me to think about why, in your being out there with companies and doing Agile Fluency with them,
Mm-hmm.
I struggle to think of a valid reason why a company would stop before the delivery zone. Do you have any examples of why they would need to go further? Yeah, that fascinates
Sure.
me. Yeah.
Organizations, there's a number of products that I would look at to think, or services that I would look at and think, yeah, maybe they don't. Let's investigate further. One of them is, and one that I was told about by another company one time, is I was asking them, somebody had told me that they were using the fluency model in their organization. And so I had a chance to speak with one of the managers, and I said, well, so tell me how this works. And they said, well, we have R&D teams that are optimizing zone teams. We have people who are working on our flagship project continually, or product, continually improving it. And those are our delivering zone teams, because our customers keep expecting, you know, improvements and new stuff. And in our marketing department, we have a group of folks that are a focusing team, and we don't worry too much about technical debt and things, because they're working on very short-term projects. Like websites, that marketing websites that are only alive during a 3 or 4 month marketing initiative, and then get swept, you know. So you're not so worried about the burden of technical debt when something like that, you know, when you're working on that. Or, and then the other place where I've seen it, seen people be really satisfied, is where they're more IT oriented, doing more configuration management, or building things for internal processes, and time isn't maybe quite as much of the essence, and they can have a longer period of time, and you know, they need reliable delivery, but they don't need fast release at will kind of delivery. So, you know, in those instances, I've seen companies that were so thrilled with getting kind of reliable focusing zone teams. It was so much better than what they had ever had before, the results they got, that it was 5, 6, 7 years before they started going, maybe we need to think about some of these teams being delivering teams, delivering zone teams.
Imagine
So
school projects
yeah,
like as well. It would be
yeah,
something similar.
yeah. And some people, I mean, while the advice that we give is, if you think you need delivering zone teams, go for delivering zone teams right from the beginning. Look at all of those proficiencies that you're going to need to get there, and just go all in a reasonable organizational change kind of way, right?
Yeah.
Other organizations decide that they want to go at a little bit slower pace, and so they really work to get focusing zone teams first, and then say, okay, now let's upgrade. Now let's, you know, take a path where we're going to begin to upgrade some of these teams to delivering zone teams. So both ways work. The second way takes a little longer, but it sometimes can be easier on the organizational systems and culture. So yeah.
Yeah. How do you know? I guess in my limited experience, I think I've been on in previous places, just because we didn't know what we didn't know, but we basically focused on the focusing zone.
Right. Right.
And because we didn't really know of anything else at that
Right.
time. But what I came to learn in those places was we needed to be in a higher zone, and we
Right.
suffered all the pains of being in
Right.
only in the focusing zone, the mountain of technical debt you talk about,
Yeah.
and all the handoffs
Right.
and the queuing. And so how do you help organizations decide what their target is? Like, because it feels like to me a lot of places might be tempted to say, oh, I'm good at a lower zone, and that might be a misassessment.
Right. Well, actually, the problem tends to be the other way around.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah.
I get managers who want optimizing zone results with the focusing zone investments, you know. And so then the real challenge becomes managing expectations. You know, what can you get for what you have? So there's trade and just having discussions about the trade-offs. You know, and having a good solid focusing zone team is so much better than not having one. Right. Right.
Yes.
So that's a step forward, and I'd rather have people do that and then figure out how to get to delivering later, when it dawns on them that they really need to make those additional investments. Right, that they really will benefit by getting those additional investments. I you know, my hand gestures, I have this mental picture of this of the model in front of me. And so, and a lot of times I will find that product folks and marketing folks want to go right for optimizing zone teams, when really most organizations don't need that. Most organizations are going to be happiest with either focusing zone or delivering zone teams. You know, maybe 10 to 15% of teams need to be optimizing zone teams that are really working on those kind of marketplace disrupting, highly innovative R&D kind of products. You know, they don't really need to be there, but it's flashy. And like you said earlier, and everybody thinks they want to be in the strengthening zone because it's the furthest we've described. The last iteration on renewing our graphic, we actually added a little tail out of the the strengthening zone, because we had begun to see some things that go even further. That in my in the way I was talking about it in terms of stories, features, products, and there are, we're beginning to see some agile teams out there that are actually focused in their community, like even beyond their organization, on helping their communities. But we haven't seen it enough, so we can't really describe it. So, you know, being clear with folks about, it's not about going as far as you can in the model. We don't even want people to do that. What we want to do is help them find the right fit. And so back to your original question, Austin, it really is having conversation with those organizational leaders about what is it that they really want to get? What is the outcome that they need? And what could that look like for them? And then having them look at whatever groups of teams they have and say, you know, well, yes, this R&D group over here does need to be an optimizing team, but these other teams can be, you know, delivering or focusing, depending on what the nature of their work is and what the nature of the outcome is that they need. And having that, being able to have that conversation then is really super helpful, because we also have a diagnostic now, which we didn't have in the beginning. In response to people asking for it, we created a diagnostic a number of years ago. Now we've got an online version of it, which is even better. And the idea being, if you decide, you create a target for the team of delivering or focusing or whatever, then we can see how close your team is to already being proficient in that zone. And then you can just look at where is the gap and only invest in closing that gap, rather than buying some big package from a big consultancy in general, you know, that has it all figured out for everybody, and it's going to offload this whole big package on you. This allows us to be much more nuanced and you know, spend the dollars and energy and attention that are available in I mean, I think of all of those as investments. Spend those where they are going to make the most sense, and be thoughtful about it. And leaders and organizations generally respond to that conversation when we come at it that way. I'm just mostly curious about what they're trying to accomplish. Nice. And then trying to find the best fit for them.
Yeah, I think what I really like about that is clarity on objective and experiments to run to maybe get there, right? Because I think you may not even know what's out there, right? Oh, there's delivering, there's optimizing, there's strengthening. And so it might set clear expectations as well, right? Like, hey, we're just targeting, focusing. Don't expect, you know, cross-functional, you know, zero bugs type stuff.
Yeah, we're not going to be necessarily bringing in really intense TDD training.
Right, gotcha.
Right. Now, individual team members might be interested in those things, and they can go and get that training, but it's not an expectation we're putting on the whole team. And that's the difference. I mean, we're the Agile Fluency model is looking at the team as a whole, and not so much concerned with, you know, what what kind of professional development is an individual team member making? Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it might be a good time to transition topics. The role of retrospectives, and I guess maybe to kick it off to say, I had a fantastic time anytime you've come with our teams and facilitated retrospectives for us. It was some deep therapy and continuous improvement. You know, it was quite a great experience. So, what are your thoughts on the role of retrospectives?
Well, you know, I actually have written 3 blog posts about how retrospective change as you move through the fluency zones. So the kinds of things, the kind of outcomes you're going to look for from your retrospectives are going to be different if you're a focusing team or a delivering team or so on. And so there's a lot of change around that. And I think the idea of retrospectives is actually beginning to spread out beyond the Agile software teams into more of IT and then into the rest of the organization. So I'm pretty excited about that, because I think retrospectives, I think one of the dynamics in organizations that gets in the way of people getting things done more than any other is, well, what we know about is the lack of psychological safety. And one component of that is, do people feel judged and blamed all the time, or do they feel, you know, free to make experiments that we were talking about, free to try new things and see if it works and benefits everybody? So retrospectives are really built on the idea of creating this container of time for the team, which is blame and judgment free. I mean, that's where the Norm Kurth's retrospective prime directive contributes to that. And definitely all the way that Esther and I constructed our 5 phases of retrospectives is all about that. It's about staying focused on what actually happened and staying away from and thinking of that as the product development that's going on as a system, as a work system, and how is that flowing? And if there are difficulties or challenges that come up or impediments that come up, those are systemic problems. They are not an opportunity to blame each other. And I think that's the biggest thing about, and that's, it's why I love the little micro retros that Ensemble teams just often do. It's like, well, so what was this last couple of Pomodoros like, and how do we want to make things better in the next couple of, what small thing could we adjust? And when you get used to doing those small things, you build team muscle for taking on the bigger things, right? That becomes much more doable when we know how to improve our lot, and that also gives more in terms of self-organizing teams. Part of the definition there is that the team has control over its work and how it does its work. And so, the more influence and control people have over that, the more psychological safety they feel. And so it all just kind of keeps building on itself in a kind of a virtuous cycle. And I think that's the role that retrospectives play, is making those pause points happen where people stop and reflect and go, is this the best we could be? Could things be better? Could our product be better? Could our teamwork be better? Could our tooling be better? Can our relationship with the product person who tells us what's valuable be better? And all of those things are up for grabs.
Yeah.
And
I often see that I see the regular retros, like the micro retros. I see weekly retros.
Right.
One thing that we've started doing recently, we've been doing for a number of months now, is we the software team greatly outnumbers the product owner team. And so we've been doing, one thing that I've kind of been doing, and it seems to be really successful, is to limit the number of people to be equal representation from both groups in a retro. And that's been really effective. And things have conversations gotten more raw and just direct, succinct feedback, not really taking anything personally, that sort of thing. As well as appreciations. It's been really a really good thing. But I think in general, if I was to keep one practice and throw them all away again and start over, right, retrospectives would have to be the right one, right?
If you've got an organizational culture that values learning, and enables people to do that, and you start doing retrospectives, eventually I think every software team would invent Agile. It just take a while, so you might want to use some of the accelerators, but I mean, and they would invent an Agile that was perfect for their particular situation. But you do need that organizational support for taking the pause, for stopping to reflect, for trying new experiments and finding ways of learning. Because if you don't have that, then it gets hard.
It was really funny because in my high school, I went to a charter school, and they had something called reflections, and a lot of it was like, what happened, what would you do next time, everything along those lines. And so in that high school, I was just like, oh, I'm getting really good at BSing because I'm just writing these things and I'm like really good at it. I look back then and I'm like, no, I actually I BS'd, and then I took that and I actually did those things. so back in high school, I had this really like childish mentality about it, but I was doing retrospectives and I was improving because of it. And so I'm thankful for that system. It was really cool, but it was just kind of funny because when I started doing retrospectives, and like in a formal environment, and then I started thinking back on those times a little bit differently, and so that was also kind of a funny story related to that.
That's awesome.
And I think it's just I think I'm with you, Chris, that if you had to tear everything down and start with one thing, that's it. Because once you see a team own their process and own their outcome, and I've seen many people come into a retrospective very skeptical, but then as soon as they collectively say, hey, we're going to run this experiment, and it improves things, or it doesn't, but they're like, okay, let's not do that again. And once that cycle starts, it just starts spreading naturally, right? And like Chris was saying, spreading to product owner organizations, or spreading anywhere people are having problems of any kind. It's just, you just bring in a retrospective. And the more frequent, the better, and it really just
safety is there. So maybe psychological safety pre.
You kind of need both, right? Although they do foster each other. Good retrospectives will foster more psychological safety, and then good psychological safety gives you better retrospectives. So those things really worked well together.
So we may run out of time for the last topic, but I wanted to ask one more question on retrospectives.
Sure.
With the author here with us. What a great time. So I have seen also retrospectives go poorly before. People come to hate them. So so I've seen it done well. I've seen it not done well. If you had only one or two things to interject into someone saying, hey, I'm going to go do retrospective for people who haven't done it before, what would you recommend as things to try to steer it away from the I hate them outcome?
Well, the hate for them generally develops over time, when they are repeatedly run poorly and poorly facilitated and so on. But a lot of times it's again, no blame. It's that people haven't been, the retrospective prime directive says, we know everyone was doing their best given, and one of those givens is they have the right skills and abilities. And very often people have given no training or anything in how to run a good, or how to facilitate a meeting, or how to run a good retrospective or anything. And when you say that, a story pops into my mind. I was working at a client a couple of years, maybe 18 months, 2 years ago. And one of the things I was asked to do was to go with the Scrum Masters, who were sort of both many of them were both Scrum Masters and product owners. Which was, never a good idea, but we knew that going in. And but I was to go with them and sort of hang out with them as they did their boundary meetings, as they did their product review or their sprint, their sprint review, product demo, however they were doing that, and then their retrospective, and then their planning meeting. And so there was one young man who it was so clear he had the very best intentions for using the team's time wisely and all of those things. He got everybody into a room. When people walked into the room, the way they sat in their chairs told me that this is not a meeting that had normally gone well. I mean, they were all like, like that all around this conference table. He plugged in his laptop into the projector, and on this big display popped up a Confluence page that he had already populated with some columns. Clearly, this is how they had done it every single time before. One of the columns was what went wrong, and another column was what do we want to do differently. And then they had a little section at the bottom that was appreciations. It wasn't called appreciations. It was called acknowledgements or something else.
No, very.
And so, so he said, okay, what do we want to put in the first column? What went wrong? And people sort of rolled their eyes, and they finally can. He typed them all in so that they showed up. So he was really the only one in the room who was active at all, right? And then, okay, what do we want to do differently? Okay, this is type those things in. Okay, what appreciations do we have? Oh, great. Now we have some time left. I've got this couple of stories I'd like us to do some refinement on before we go back to work. And I was sitting there through the whole thing, and I'm looking at what went wrong and what do we want to do differently, right? And we're going to walk out of the room. And I said, and I couldn't stand it. I mean, I was supposed to just be there observing. And I just said, can I ask a question? You planning to do anything about any of those things on that list? Yeah. And all it took was me asking that question. And all the team members went, yeah, we really want to make, that thing we could really do, but, and they all started talking. And they had not been talking through the whole retrospective. But none of them had either the skill or the willingness to ask that, are we going to do anything about any of those things? Do we have a plan? Are we going to try to improve at all? And it just that turned that around, and they walked out of there with like 2 things that they were going to try. And there was so much more energy when they left the room than there was when they came in the room, right? And so I see a lot of that sort of thing happening. It's just that people have not, I made sure that young man got a copy of the book. So here, why don't you take a look at this, and we can talk, and let me know if there's anything else here, that you'd like to adjust. And then I went on, and I watched a bunch of other retrospectives of other teams, and there was like one that was really doing stuff where people really felt energized with it, and the rest of them were all that way. And I think the reliance on Confluence and those kinds of things, those tools, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, that's one of the kinds of ways that the tools get in the way. And so it's not, I mean, now we're in this all remote world, But people are finding ways of holding retrospectives by looking for, Miro and mural and places where they can have colorful sticky notes, even though they're sticky notes. They're not, then you don't get the tangibility. But people are looking for those ways of keeping the 5 rules of accelerated learning, right? Keeping the aliveness in their retrospectives, making sure it's really focused on doing real work in the retrospective, creating a setting that makes it feel like we're really getting work done, and that we really are collaborating together, and so on. So, we can do those things even if we're doing them online. And I think that becomes super important. But a lot of times it's, when people went through they either didn't go through Scrum Master training at all, or any kind of team player coach training or anything like that, or they did and their trainer told them that a retrospective is only 2 questions or whatever. I mean, Esther and I heard that in 2005 when we were writing the book. How can you write a whole book about retrospectives? It's only 2 questions. Yeah. It's like, well,
Wow.
no, not if you want to make the time worthwhile. So anyway, I'll stop there. But yeah, that's my response to that. I mean, it has to do with really wanting to use people's time wisely and get learning and improvement out of it.
Yeah, I know it's definitely frustrating if you go into a retrospective and then nothing's done about anything that was discussed, right? The action items are paramount.
What a waste of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're calling it a retrospective, it's still a waste of time.
Yeah. I think I've been on teams before where I came in, someone was holding retrospectives, and it was just a gripe session, and then people got angry with each other and then walked out, kind of thing. And as soon as experiments came out of it that started to improve things, like a whole new era started for that team. So I definitely second the things you said. But in light of time, we're going to have to close. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's a bummer. I'd love to keep talking to you, but we'll maybe pick it up some other time. But is there anything you'd like to plug or share before we close out the episode?
Well, at the Agile Fluency Project, we have workshops where we teach people to use our model and our diagnostic and our improvement cycle and all the other materials around that to give them more opportunities to do good coaching. We don't teach people how to be a coach. We know there are lots of people out there who really know very well how to do excellent coaching when they're with the team. It's getting the opportunities to be with the team that is the tricky part. And so that's what we work on. And then, once people have gotten a license to use our materials, we mentor them and try to create a good community, a good network. So that people can support each other. So that's what we're about. We have a couple of new workshops coming up in November. We cover pretty much of the world in terms of time zones with our workshops, and then we have another accelerated one coming in December. So I'd like for folks to go to our website and check that out.
Yeah, and we'll put links in the notes. So with that said, thank you, Diana, for joining us. And to all of our viewers, if you feel like any of the content in this video would help you or someone you know, maybe some poor retrospectives might be happening, be sure to share this video with those people. And with that, like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. So fun to see you again. Bye.